Crime within the Amish world. In the Amish communities, there are different types of crime, which I believe can be broken down into 3 different categories. The first one being clear violations of the law, which do not turn questions of religious liberty. Some examples include child abuse and disregard for federal environmental protection regulations. This can clearly be seen in the event of an Amish teenager being arrested for drinking underage. The Amish do not expect special treatment or considerations because of their religion in this case. The second category is violations of the law when the regulations do not appear to outsiders to pertain to religious matters, but in fact are intrusive for some Amish groups. This can include zoning laws and building codes. With building codes, it's clearly seen that the Amish do not follow these completely. Regulations requiring them to install smoke detectors have on-site inspections violate their religious beliefs. It can be hard for outsiders to understand this because they are used to the modern building code system based on inspections. However, freedom of religion is stated right in the First Amendment, and the Amish have many supporters to continue their simplistic ways. The third category is violations of the law that have obvious claims of religious liberty or matters of serious church conviction. This can include objection during the war times and rejection to photo identification. I believe that this is clearly shown in the schooling of the Amish. The children only participate in school up until the 8th grade. Ending school early allowed for the children to be well equipped for the workforce that they were soon entering. This is something very strong in their religion that they believe in. Their right to end school early was confirmed by a 1972 ruling of the United States Supreme Court. There are virtually no statistics when it comes to Amish crime. This stems from them living in a very secretive group that tries their best to avoid the authorities. However, crime does occur just as it would in mainstream society. However, it may not be to the same extent, but in fact it does still happen. Any statistics that are found about Amish crime are very inaccurate. This is because many cases go unreported, whether the suspect isn't caught committing crimes or if the victim chooses to keep their lips sealed. Most cases of crime in the Amish world are just swept under the rug and not reported to the authorities. For the information to be more accurate, many more cases would need to be reported to the law enforcement. This is how crime is typically handled in the Amish community. A crime may never go any farther than the point where it ends. This is because most Amish are very secretive and choose to keep to themselves. However, when it becomes public knowledge, the church steps in to correct these actions. The suspect will typically confess to their crimes, and then the bishop, the highest power of their church, will determine the punishment. If the bishop is unable to come to a conclusion of his own, he will invite other bishops from different communities to hear their input about the situation. With the other bishop's advice, they come up with a punishment that suits the crime. Typically, their punishment will include some sort of shaming or shunning by the community. This, in my opinion, is their way of publicly embarrassing someone enough into not committing more crime. When the punishment is fulfilled by the suspect, they have the chance to return to the church. In order to do so, they must prove their repentance. If they are unable to prove this, then they risk being excommunicated by the Amish church. If repentance is proven, all goes back to normal in their lives. This is because they believe that the church is the highest power, and when the situation is solved and taken care of, it is completely over with. In the rare instance that a case moves forward with authorities, the church becomes frustrated because the situation is considered handled. God is always seen as the highest power and above the law, and that the law should be avoided at all costs. Just like any crime that happens within the Amish community, when a crime is committed against them, it typically ends right after it happens. Because of their belief of gate loss and height, giving themselves up to the church, the Amish choose not to react to crimes committed against them. Gate loss and height signals a calm surrender of God's will. Although there may be terrible crimes that are committed against the Amish community, they accept suffering with a quiet confidence, knowing that God's will completely shapes all events into a pattern of good. An example of gay loss and height principle in action is when the Anabaptist martyrs died without fighting back. They prove their virtue of surrendering to God throughout these events. The Amish do not seek out evil or revenge following a crime. They are quick to forgive after a crime occurs. They believe that God is at the highest power above the law and that He has a plan, and they are going to follow it to the best of their ability. There was a hate crime that occurred a few years ago up in Cleveland where men and women were held down and their hair was cut or their beard was trimmed. The length of the hair, whether on the head or the beard, are a staple in the Amish religion and are seen as very religious. Although the Amish members were the ones that were attacked, most victims were reluctant to talk about it. They would remain calm about the situation and move on with their life, believing that God has this in their plan. However, local law enforcement filed charges against the suspects. Eventually, the FBI got involved and 16 people were sentenced and faced prison time for the hate crime. This likely would have never gone to court if it wasn't for the local authorities stepping in and pressing charges against them. Rumspringa is a time in the Amish youth's lives that they decide if they want to be baptized in the church. This time period usually begins around 16 years old and ends in marriage, which signals adulthood. Therefore, the main purpose of this time period is to find a partner. This time in their life has a very negative connotation, and many assume this is when the Amish break the law. Some misconceptions include that they move to the city to participate in normal life, but most continue to live at home and simply go out with the other Amish youth in the nearby communities on the weekends. Media likes to imply that this time period is one where the youth experiment with drugs, engage in premarital sex, and flock to drinking parties. The most notorious parties that include alcohol and drug abuse typically happen in the larger settlements. Although this does happen, many Amish youth choose not to participate in these events. The youth also may rebel in other ways besides sex, drugs, and alcohol. Many buy cell phones, TVs, or even a car and hide them from their community. The stage called Rumspringa is considered quite the rebellious time period of the Amish youth. However, this age range is also considered rebellious in the youth of mainstream society as well. Though in mainstream society, many of the youth are still in school, while the Amish are not. Although it may not be as common in the Amish to commit these crimes, many people love to hear stories about those that venture out and find themselves in trouble. Many headlines go viral when the Amish lash out because they typically live a fairly quiet life and avoid the media. I did a quick search about Rumspringa and found several relevant headlines. These include The Amish and Drugs, What You Didn't Know, and this includes a paragraph that states that during this time period, the youth experiment with drugs. Another headline is The Secret Life of America's Modern Amish that talks about an instance that occurred in Millersburg, Ohio, where 70 Amish were arrested, mostly youth, and 2 were sent to the hospital with severe alcohol symptoms. One more is Rumspringa Amish teens venture into modern vices, states in the first paragraph that for some, Rumspringa is all about sex, parties, and fast cars. According to the many stories online, sexual abuse is fairly common throughout the Amish communities. Many ex-Amish women share their stories of being sexually abused in an attempt to offer help to those that are going through the same thing. It isn't uncommon for the perpetrator to be someone the victim knows. This can be their father, brother, or any other family member. The victims are typically young women who are not baptized or married. Sexual abuse is a sin in the eyes of the church, and the church attempts to fix the problem when it becomes public knowledge. The perpetrator will get punishment from the church and then will be forgiven when it's over. This means that things will go back to normal and the church solved the issue. There are many stories that can be looked up online, but one that I found interesting was that of a 9-year-old girl that was getting raped by her brother. And then by age 12, she was being abused by her father as well. And by 14, she was now being abused by 3 more brothers. She was being abused multiple times a week, whether in the hayloft or in her bed. And she was taught to keep to herself and not talk about what was occurring. She kept quiet, even when the police questioned her, because she knew she wasn't allowed to go to authorities with this information. Now that she left the community, she came forward with her story and helps those that are in similar situations to her. After punishment from the church, it is common for the abuse to continue. This may mean that the authorities need to be involved. However, reporting abuse to the authorities can be quite difficult because most of the victims aren't sure how to communicate what has happened. Sex education isn't in the curriculum, and many don't understand that what is happening is wrong or inappropriate. The abuse is commonly reported to the church leaders, who are always male. By living in a male-dominant community, sometimes the female victims face intimidation and scorn with their family because they are taught to believe that they are to blame for the abuse. This is very common, especially if the abuse is reported to the law enforcement. These young girls may risk their reputation in the church by reporting the abuse. The leaders of the church can easily minimize the acts of the male perpetrators as well. This is why many cases of sexual abuse in the Amish communities go unreported. Despite how hard it is to report and respond to the abuse, there is much more information now than ever. Many Amish and ex-Amish women are trying to raise awareness and support those that are going through similar situations as them. In the discussion post, it is asked, how is criminal activity handled by the Amish? Although it may be rare, surely there is crime committed by both the Amish and against the Amish. Do they report crime that transpires internally? Well, most crime committed in the Amish community is kept internal, meaning that it goes unreported. When crime becomes public knowledge, the church steps in and the bishop decides what punishment best suits the crime. When the suspect follows through with their church punishment, they are forgiven and the issue is considered solved. If the victim takes the case to outside authorities, the church gets upset because it's already handled. This may then make the victim seem as if they are in the wrong because the Amish heavily believe in forgiveness and salvation. In the case of a young girl, Mary Byler, who grew up in Wisconsin and was raped throughout her childhood by her 2 brothers, she was said to forgive them because of her Amish values. She went against the normal and pressed charges, and 1 brother was sent to jail. In the eyes of the church, Byler was in the wrong. The community believes that her brothers were punished and forgiven by the church, and in the incidents should not be brought to the courtroom, and that the brothers should be kept out of jail. This discussion question is actually a continuation of the previous, but I feel that it does well on its own. So, do the Amish rely on police for enforcement of laws when a crime is committed against them. The Amish are more than likely not going to rely on law enforcement when a crime is committed against them. It is very common for the Amish to do nothing following a crime. Sure, depending on the crime, emotions may be expressed, but action against the suspect likely will not occur. The Amish church believes in forgiveness and sees the force of law to be against the religious spirit. I feel like this is best shown in the Amish response to the nickel mine shooting. The Amish shocked the world when they forgave the dairy truck driver, Charles Roberts, for the murder of 5 young girls. The Amish quickly let his wife know that they forgave him and that they were sorry for her loss as well. Many of the Amish members also showed up to Charles' funeral to show that he was truly forgiven what he had done. Their forgiveness gave Charles' wife the courage to heal and positively move on with her life as well.
Legal issues within the Amish. Matthew 18:15 through 17. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his faults, just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if he will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along so that every matter may be established by a testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. If he refuses to listen to the church, treat him as you would a pagan. When it comes to crime and punishment, the Amish live by a different set of rules, God's rules. Most offenses in the community are violations of the rules, or actions by persons who, frequently without their knowledge, become the focus of disunity. Economic disputes occur infrequently. When disputes arise between 2 Amish individuals, a church-monitored process begins. It is primarily up to the 2 individuals to resolve the matter and grant forgiveness. If an individual violates the church rules, the offender must 1. Repent and seek forgiveness, 2. Face excommunication, 3. Join another congregation, or 4. Leave the church altogether. Discussion board questions. How do the Amish enforce their contracts, specifically with other Amish members? Would they use the public courts and lawyers? The Amish generally do not have written contracts among themselves. They believe their word is binding and nothing more is needed outside of a handshake. The Amish do not involve themselves in the modern court system. They believe that filing a lawsuit is taboo. In my research, I was able to find a few cases where Amish filed suits against other Amish, but in almost all of those cases, the person who filed the claim had already been shunned or excommunicated by the church. Discussion board question. Are the Amish allowed to use lawyers and whatnot to help run their businesses if they get into legal trouble? Or do they just have to fend for themselves because the Amish do business with people who are not Amish and people who can use lawyers? As stated in an earlier discussion question, the Amish generally do not involve outside legal assistance. They feel it is taboo. They conduct business by having faith in others. They are the first to forgive if someone they are doing business with does them wrong. They rarely seek retribution and are often suffer the transgressions. Because of their beliefs, litigation is not a viable option for conflict resolution and is even grounds for excommunication. When conflict arises with the outside world, the prohibition against lawsuits and other aggressive or retaliatory behavior is just as strong. In practice, Amish individuals will either forgive or suffer transgressions. This can leave an Amish member in a position of exploitation. The perpetrator of the crime stands a greater chance of avoiding punishment when the victim is Amish. It should be pointed out that while the Amish have their own community laws, they do accept outside government as necessary and willing to pay all taxes. They do not accept welfare, Social Security, Medicare, or government assistance. Having a peaceful, forgiving character means there are fewer consequences for those who attempt harm. The Amish rarely press charges and would rather forgive than send a perpetrator to jail. We saw this in the Amish Grace movie. Occasionally, the United States law conflicts with the Amish values. The values of the Amish will generally always take precedence. In the last century, Amish parents did not want their children in school past 8th grade, and they willingly went to jail for the right to keep them out of public schools. Many, in fact, did go to jail. In 1972, the Supreme Court ruling granted them the exception. Mainstream law and Amish justice have collided more recently in a handful of sexual assault cases within the Amish community. In some cases, charges were never filed and punishment is left to the forgiving standards of the church. Few prosecutors, jurors, and judges will convict the Amish because of their peaceful lifestyle. Amish use negotiation in the form of bargaining and even lobbying, supplemented by economic power and favorable public opinion. This has enabled Amish individuals and businesses to protect their interests. Willingness to negotiate with Caesar, the Amish have shown a greater willingness to negotiate with government. When negotiation has failed, litigation has sometimes arisen despite of the self-imposed ban. Even then, litigation is still an anomaly and occurs only under extreme circumstances. Discussion board question. When Amish get married, do they legally get married and report it to the government or keep it within their group? There was conflicting information regarding the Amish applying for a marriage license or self-uniting license. It appears that the majority of Amish do obtain some form of a license for marriage, but it seems to be dependent on their specific community. Their weddings take place on Tuesday or Thursday between the months of October after baptism and March when there is no harvest. The Amish marry for life and view their marriage as sacred. Discussion board question. How is it that the Amish pay income tax but are exempt from Social Security tax? The Amish opposition to compulsory insurance was widely publicized when Social Security benefits were extended through Public Law 761, January 1st, 1955. The Amish sought exemption from this tax and its benefits. In July 1965, President Johnson signed Public Law 89 through 97, which provided medical care for the aged under the Medicare section of the Social Security Act. Section 319 of this bill contained a subsection permitting an individual to apply for exemption from this self-employment tax. Potential future issues with Amish. 30 years ago, social scientists predicted that the Amish would be absorbed into the larger society in a few decades. The predictions were wrong. Moreover, the Amish population has more than doubled in 30 years. The Amish are one of the fastest growing population groups in America. Their population has risen from about 5,000 in 1920 to almost 300,000 today, and much of their growth has occurred in the last 3 decades. The population explosion is due to the belief that large families, seen as a blessing from God, the larger number of children has also provided labor for their farming enterprises.
Contrary to popular belief, the population has steadily increased over the years among the Amish. The Amish population in the U.S. and Canada has doubled in the past 20 years. In 1991, there was almost 124,000, while in 2010, it was already up to almost 250,000. The second graph shows you a projected Amish population according to the current growth rate, doubling every 21 and a half years from 2018 on.
Traditionally, farming of all kinds has been the center of Amish work life. However, in the past century, according to the Young Center, increasing numbers have become involved in business enterprises, most notably in carpentry and the selling of farm products. They also form construction crews that build houses and other buildings of non-Amish and sometimes work in English-owned factories and workshops, such as those in Indiana that manufacture recreational vehicles.
Working outside of the community was always avoided by the Amish. Having a farm was ideal because the wife would be able to take care of the house, the husband be in charge of the farming, and the children help out and do all the chores. This allowed the families to heavily watch over their children. However, land became increasingly expensive and the ability to farm became more difficult, especially without modern technology. This led many of the Amish men finding jobs outside of the community, often exposing themselves to the outside world. Thus, the lunch pail problem was born. The Amish now are exposed to the modern world and all of the advances that have taken place over the years. This could potentially become a large issue because of the threat it imposes. Working outside of the Amish community could drive a wedge between the families and cause disruption.
Amish life is about recognizing the values of agreed upon limits. As society changes and advances, there will undoubtedly be shifts within the Amish communities. I believe we will continue to see the Amish stand at odds over certain government laws that do not uphold their values. I also believe that the increase in sexual assault accusations that are making their way into our modern court systems is a testament to the change in the way Amish view certain crimes in their interactions with the legal system. I still believe they will view punishment through the eyes of forgiveness, but we might see a judicial system less sympathetic to the Amish abuser. Discussion board question. If another war came about that resembled the total wars in the past, where everyone had to help with the war effort, would the Amish be exempt from this because of their right to not be modern and avoid violence? Or would they too have to help in the war effort? The Amish are exempt from military service due to their belief of non resistance, a term they prefer over pacifism. This implies not only to war, but also law enforcement, politics, and legal actions. It is difficult to predict what would be required of the Amish if total war broke out. Based on my research, I feel comfortable saying that the Amish would find other ways to support their country in a time of war. What that support would look like is difficult to anticipate. I could see them lending their carpentry skills, farming production, and possibly even land passage for military equipment. Discussion board question. How is it that Amish are considered true American citizens? Sure, they are born and raised here. However, have they adopted to any American values? What responsibilities as citizens do they hold in America? The Amish are American citizens simply as a result of being born in this country. Our country was founded on Christian beliefs, and the Amish are a group of Protestant Christians with strong religious convictions. When you consider a few of the top American values independence, privacy, equality I think it is fair to state that the Amish have adopted some American values. Some of their responsibilities as citizens include to obey laws, respect the rights and opinions of others, participate in their local communities, and pay taxes. The Amish are taxed on their earnings. According to the Young Center, they pay all the taxes, income, property, sales, estate, corporate, school, that all other people do. They do not, however, pay or collect Social Security.